You brought up Wired and the idea of flying wheelchairs. Why do that? Isn't it irrelevant? Wheels are meant to roll on the ground. We're doing it because these are our bodies. Why wouldn't we fly in our wheelchairs?
Hello and welcome to Art Restart, where we learn from artists who, wherever they work, whatever they make, are shaking up the status quo in their fields and in their communities. I'm Piercarlo Talenti, the producer and editor of this podcast, which is brought to you by the Thomas S. Keenan Institute for the Arts at the University of North Carolina School of the Arts. In this episode, we'll be speaking with Alice Sheppard and Laurel Lawson, two of the leaders of disability arts ensemble Kinetic Light. And in an Art Restart first, my guests offered to describe themselves, and I happily accepted their offer.
I'm Alice Sheppard, and I frequently describe myself as a multiracial Black woman. Today, I have dyed blonde, curly, natural hair that is short, but tied up in my black headset. I am wearing my glasses, and I am dressed in a fuzzy gray oversized sweater and black fleece trousers and pink fluffy socks with a brown, orange, red, green, yellow striped blanket wrapped around every little part of me.
Classic. And I'm Laurel Lawson. I am a white person with presently quite pink and freckled skin, having been out and about outside for the last few days. My hair is cropped short and is presently all the colors from sapphire through peacock and teal and into green. I am wearing a black t-shirt with a heavy, knobbly texture and black tights, and I am not swaddled up in blankets. I am sitting in my wheelchair, which is titanium and black carbon fiber.
Alice and Laurel are proficient, trained, and adventurous dancers, and since 2016, when Alice founded Kinetic Light, they've created and performed several works for the company. In Kinetic Light's first piece, titled Descent, they danced in their wheelchairs on a raked stage with a large ramp, stage designed by Laurel, and since then have proved to be increasingly adventurous in exploring their relationship to gravity. In recent pieces, they've boldly moved into the vertical axis, sometimes flying into the air, in or out of a wheelchair, thanks to ingenious mechanisms, likewise created by Laurel. Alice and Laurel have also become accessibility and technological innovators, because in Kinetic Light, accessibility is not merely a supplemental consideration, it is essential to the art. As such, every performance is created from the ground up for everyone to fully enjoy. For instance, the company's lighting designer, Michael Magg, who uses a wheelchair, lights mobility devices with the same care he lights a human body, and also pays attention to the needs of neurodiverse audiences. Some seats are equipped with haptic devices to allow deaf audience members to feel the vibration of the music. And Laurel has developed Automance, a multi-track audio description app that gives blind and visually impaired guests control over how to experience and enjoy the performance. Alice spoke to me from her home in New York City. Laurel was traveling and spoke to me from her hotel room bathroom, to which she'd very kindly retreated to block out some outside noise. I started our talk by asking Alice what her original mission was when she launched Kinetic Light, and what had she yet to learn or discover when she started.
So there's a short story and there's a long story, and this is Alice, and we're probably going to have to sort of narrate a little bit in between and toss it backwards and forwards.
Okay.
So we didn't actually found Kinetic Light with a mission straight up from the top down. Laurel, Michael, and I gathered to make work, and we found principles, concepts, beliefs, and ideas growing together in our conversations and our art making practices. What we coalesced around was the idea, some principal ideas, that we don't take the non-disabled world as a point of reference, that we are disability-centered, that disability aesthetics, culture, politics, and history inform the work to begin with, and that we imagine a disabled audience as primary. This is now later language. I think back then I was saying, I want our work to find home with disabled people. So that's July. Laurel, how about December, January?
One of the things we often say about Kinetic Light is that Kinetic Light is not a dance company. It is true that dance, that movement, that embodiment is a central method of our public work. And as a disability arts company, we're also deeply rooted in technology, in research, in writing, speaking, practice. So these kinds of principles, and we say principles because access is never one size fits all. Access is not a checklist. We begin from these ideas, and then it will be necessary in each situation, yes, for each work, for each kind of organization, even for each venue, to make adjustments. And there are some ways we can make that simpler. And particularly in that first few years, from beginning to create Descent in 2016 until it premiered, we learned vast amounts about what did and did not work.
Can you give me an example?
Well, here's one of the ones that we talk about a lot with audio description. It was that December, January span that Alice tried to toss over to me. We were doing our first public-ish showing of sections of Descent in San Francisco. And we had invited basically everybody, all the disabled people we knew, our friends, our teachers and mentors and students, colleagues, enemies and frenemies. We invited everyone. We packed as many disabled people as we could into this little theater. We were in that dead week just before New Year's, so that the theater was dark and we were able to get the space cheaply, in no small part as a favor. But one of the things that came from that performance was the aftermath with our blind friends and colleagues. We had an audio describer for the show, a very, very good one, but any single audio describer can only do so much. Vision is broadband. You can take in a lot of things simultaneously, and you have a lot of choice in how you choose to use vision, whether you're looking at the room or the people or the whole stage, or even focusing in on a single dancer or just a gesture. One person talking is narrowband. There is only so much that can be communicated in that form. So after the show, some folks came up to us and said, we could hear people gasping and we could feel them. They were leaning forward in their seats. They were excited or anxious. But, there just wasn't anything all that exciting in the audio description. What did we miss? That was one of those really critical points that led to the development of the Automance platform. And, our approach of multi-channel audio description, understanding that for an audio experience that is as rich and complex and offers as much agency and experience for a non-sighted audience, it is absolutely critical to offer multiple channels, multiple layers, multiple kinds of audio description. So that's now become a practice where, for most works, we offer anywhere from, say, 5 to 15 channels of audio description that people can themselves mix, layer, choose according to their own wants.
That sounds revolutionary. Is this the first of its kind?
It is. It is.
Wow. I'd love to hear how you both became dancers.
Both of us came to dance as adults, and right now, at least, that's a very, very common experience for disabled artists because it's very difficult. Certainly, when I was a child, when I was in kindergarten, I wanted to go to ballet class because every other little girl in kindergarten went to ballet. It was, something that my friends did, and I wanted to fit in, and it seemed like they were having fun. But at that time, little girls in wheelchairs didn't go to ballet class. So while things are slowly shifting, and there's a real problem in that there are very few people in the world who are actually competent to teach wheelchair dance technique. You can't just go to your little neighborhood dance studio that exists in every small town in the United States to find teaching. But yes, I began dancing professionally in 2004. I trained with Full Radius Dance in Atlanta and danced with the company until 2020.
You were also trained as a designer along the way, as an engineer?
I began working in tech in 2016, and yes, I was working independently as a contractor through that time. And about the same time, I think technically the paperwork was just a little bit after, moved into founding a boutique engineering consultancy with my business partner. These are parallel pathways. I was essentially dual careered, and I still am in some ways. That there are aspects which are purely choreographic and performance based, and aspects which are entirely in the tech world, but also understanding that my actual core practice is that of artist engineer in these spaces of innovating both artistically and technologically. So, depending on the exact context, I may be showing up as a choreographer, I may be showing up as a product architect, or I may be showing up, and really always am, as entirely both. And that's not something, I'm not the only one. We are out there. It is not super common because there are challenges to having these kind of side-by-side professional specialties.
Alice, what is your dance origin story?
I came in really differently. I grew up as a child, I had a non-disabled childhood, and I worked as a musician, a classical musician, often doing pit work. And,
What was your instrument?
I played the flute in some situations and piano in others, and there was a bad sax moment, but there we go. Um, Dancers were the people thunking around above me, and I had no desire to be one of them whatsoever. And, over time, instead of going to music college, I went to university, and I got a PhD, came to the US, and not in that order, became a professor of medieval studies, and then began to do work when I became disabled in disability studies. So I have an intensely deep academic research background in disability studies and in languages. So my pathway to dance was pretty abrupt. I met a disabled dancer, Homer Avila, at a performance in a conference on disability studies in the university. And at the end of the night we were, long story short, Homer dared, and I accepted the dare to take a dance class. And then 6 weeks later, I learned that he was dead, and I had spent some time trying to then figure out, how do I honor the dare? And, finding a dance class that would take me was one challenge. Finding a dance class that would teach me was a different challenge. And eventually I was able to train with Kitty Lunn from Infinity Dance Theatre in New York, and joined Access Dance Company. And yeah, began dancing that way. I resigned. I got tenure, and a couple of days afterwards, I resigned and committed to try and learn to be a dancer. And without really knowing what that would mean, or what kind of career pathway would be out there, because at that time there really was no obvious career pathway, and there still really isn't. And decided I was going to do this, and did it. And now here I am, which is not to say that this was plain sailing, but that's to cut a long story short, with lots of...
That's incredible. So you resigned from a tenured position a few days after receiving tenure.
I did.
Where I love to talk about artistic spirit and motivation. Where did that kind of it wasn't an impulse, but that kind of courage come from, or conviction?
I have a dear friend, Daniel Sherman, who, hours of long conversation, just finally got fed up with me and was like, are you going to live your life or not? Are you going to commit to living and working and striving for beauty or not? If you do, here are some things that you can do. And if you don't, this is what your life is going to look like. I was like, okay, that was easy enough, clear enough.
That's a good friend to have, a good and somewhat frightening friend to have.
Oh, Daniel's adorable. He's adorable. I wonder if he'll actually hear this. I'll send him this.
Okay, good. Good. I hope you do. A good testament to how helpful he was. I think an ableist way to interpret accessibility and technology used towards accessibility is to think about it as, oh, this is technology meant to overcome disability. And clearly you center disability in your work. Do you ever, as a company, as a collective, discuss amongst yourselves how to not let technology eclipse or overshadow the disabled body and the disabled experience?
This is a really complicated question. We do talk about all of those things, but let me back out a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
I think the world is slightly more pernicious than your question describes. And I do mean pernicious in a very deliberate way, because I think an unspoken understanding is that it is not so much overcome or outshine a disabled body or mind, but that the access to technology is to bridge the gap between disabled and non-disabled worlds, and that the person who then has a technology, once that technology is given, acquired, made, that person is supposed to function as a normative person. So I think, right. You've got your wheelchair? Okay, off you go. Got your hearing aids? Okay, got your cane? Off you go, and go live a non-disabled life. Boom. So it's not so much as overcoming as erasure. And it's a dirty underside to the question that you're asking, which we do talk about. We talk about both faces of that question a lot, because technology, and I think Laurel and I have different language on this, technology does not overcome or enable you to overcome a disability. And I think the question for me is, if it is being seen as overshadowing or seen as eclipsing us, that says an awful lot about the lens through which we are being interpreted. It's not about us, it's about the viewer. And I'm going to pause there for a second. Yeah, end thought.
Perhaps the core difference in the way that we approach it is understanding access as culture, as aesthetic, as a driver of innovation. So we're actually prioritizing the ways in which disabled people exist, embody, communicate, experience, and heightening those aspects that are important and powerful and joyful. So, one of the things that means is that, rather than thinking that access is something that creates this kind of single normative environment for everyone, in our world, what someone might term access actually is not something that a non-disabled person can use. Automance is a great example of that. If you're in this kind of full multi-channel, thickly layered, rich audio environment, that's something that a lot of non-visual people greatly enjoy. I mean, this is their world. It is not the world of most sighted people. And in fact, it is for many people extraordinarily overwhelming, even unintelligible. We are not making access that attempts to approximate a non-disabled experience. You brought up Wired and the idea of flying wheelchairs. Why do that? Isn't it irrelevant? Wheels are meant to roll on the ground. We're doing it because these are our bodies. Why wouldn't we fly in our wheelchairs? When I'm teaching dance, I often talk about the unique privilege of certain disabled dancers is that of multiple embodiments.
I don't think could you explain what you mean by multiple embodiments? I don't think I understand it.
So our wheelchairs are not an access mechanism. They're not things that we just get in to get from point A to point B. They are part of our bodies. This body is as much metal, carbon fiber, as it is flesh and blood and bone. Now, at the same time, we also work out of our chairs, dancing largely on the floor, or even sometimes with crutches or in other ways. That is no less a whole and complete embodiment. I often joke, like, if I get out of my chair and I push my chair 6 feet away, it's not like I've been disemboweled. That becomes really gross and weird to think about, right?
Right.
But these are two fundamentally different bodies with completely different dance techniques, so that we have to learn these multiple forms and techniques in these different ways. But yeah, why wouldn't we fly in our chairs? Because those are simply our bodies moving through space.
As you may or may not know, the Thomas S. Keenan Institute for the Arts, which produces this podcast, operates within the University of North Carolina's School of the Arts, which is a world-class conservatory. So I wonder, how would you like accessibility to be taught or incorporated in art school syllabi for able-bodied and disabled students alike?
I have been waiting for this question. I've been waiting for this question.
Oh, good.
Try to keep yourself contained, Alice.
So I have a very serious question for you. And of course, it's not something that you can necessarily affect. But I really think that this question is a problem. So I'm going to ask a different question. And that is, are you admitting disabled students? How many disabled students are you admitting? What kinds of courses are they admitted to? What kinds of support do you have for disabled students? Do you have disabled faculty? Do you have faculty who have expertise in disability culture, in disability and disabled performance, in disabled techniques? And the reason that I'm asking those questions, because, it's not that your question isn't a worthy and noble question. It assumes that we have to, I want to take the whole thing down and build it back up. Admit the students. hire the teachers, identify the work. Don't just tack on a couple of things about access in the syllabus, right? Reroute, recenter, build disability culture into the structure, the values, the peopledom of the institution. And then we can talk about how to teach access. Does that make sense?
Yes, approach it the way you approach Kinetic Light. It makes absolute sense. Yeah.
Well, yes, except that I'm not talking about the ideal, the kind of ideal principle-driven way that we've been able to build Kinetic Light. I am simply talking about, like, what does it take for a disabled dancer to gain entree in? What does it take for a disabled musician? The notion that there is world class, that you are world class, often means that simply that phrase, world class, means that you don't necessarily look at disabled applicants. Like, do you know what I mean? I am trying to, like, that self-image. So I want to, and that kind of conservatory education, like, so few disabled students are able to be accepted to conservatory educations. And that is not about us. It's about the institutions themselves. And so I want to be able to find a way in which there's a sufficient institutional self-awareness and change that students can be admitted. And once admitted, they can be taught and have access to a training and education so that they can go on to become faculty. You know what I mean? It's almost, yes, we have to teach access, but really, we actually need to change the institution. And so my question is, are you open to institutional change?
It's a good question, and I'm not the person to answer that.
I know, but I had to ask it anyway.
Laurel, do you have anything to add?
I mean, that really is the core of it. I mean, yes, absolutely. Every university-trained degree dance student should be graduating with at least some minimal education in how their work can be accessible, some amount of, understanding the very basic, what is audio description, competence in being able to describe their own movement, understanding that videos need to be captioned, that things need to be interpreted. There are these very, very basic kind of things that honestly, universities and conservatories are simply utterly derelict in right now because people aren't losing these absolute fundamentals. And at the same time, you cannot claim to be a complete institution. I don't think you get to claim world-class status if you are excluding disabled students. And, realistically, that is exactly what is going on. It is no different from excluding students from any other protected or marginalized category. We've had institutions go through these kinds of reckonings of racial integration, of people really calling out exclusion there. Let's identify and call out the exclusion of disabled students, because right now it's not only, we're centering the disabled students who aren't there. And you're also graduating classes and classes and classes of artists who have never worked with a disabled artist, who don't understand that they exist in the field, and by virtue of their, quote, world-class education, are going to come out and treat disabled artists as less than because they have been excluded from that particular kind of education. And is a conservatory education necessary? No, clearly not. And it is still important as an educational route because the way Alice and I both did it is really hard. And it shouldn't have to be that hard.
If you'd like to read a longer version of this interview and see some images of Alice and Laurel in performance, please head to uncsa.edu/artrestart. Our theme music is by Shanghai Restoration Project. I'm Piercarlo Talenti, and on behalf of the Kenan Institute for the Arts at the University of North Carolina School of the Arts, thank you for listening.